Welcome to my channel. Today we'll talk about Scrum Artifacts in detail. Why Scrum Artifacts? Scrum Artifacts are needed to store and track the requirements. What are requirements? As its simplest, a requirement is a service, function, or feature that a user needs. Requirement can be function, constraints, business rules, or the elements that must be present to meet the need of the intended user. Requirements can be stored in the form of epic, feature, user story, or task. Epic is a big chunk of work like a big project which gets delivered in one release or multiple releases. It gets broken down into features. Features deliver a package of functionality that end user would generally expect to get all at once. They should be in this size which gets delivered within one release. Features are stored in the product backlog and further refined and broken down into user stories. Each user story should be of the size which gets completed into one sprint. User stories can further be broken down into tasks which gets completed in 1 or 2 days. Whether you're breaking down an epic, a user story, or any work item in your backlog into tasks, it's important to remember to split them across function boundaries and not technical ones. For example, if the work item is enabling online payment for an e-commerce store, you can split it into debit card payment and credit card payment instead of design, development, and testing. To be brief, epics are of month time and bigger than release. Features are of weeks time and bigger than sprint. User story are of days time and are sprint ready. Lastly, tasks are of the hours time. Let's look at how the requirement gets stored using the Scrum artifacts. Requirements are organized and prioritized in the product backlog in the form of features, enhancement, fixes, action item from the retrospective, and user stories. Features are further refined into user story of the size smaller than or equal to one sprint. Product goal becomes a commitment of the product backlog. Sprint backlog is composed of why, what, and how. Team picks a user story, enhancement, and fixes which can be completed in one sprint and becomes the what for the sprint backlog. Sprint goal becomes the why and the commitment for the sprint backlog. Team come up with an actionable plan for how to achieve the items within that sprint. That actionable plan becomes the how for the sprint backlog. Team picks the item from the sprint backlog and started working on it during the 2 to 4 week sprint, which resulted into the increment with the definition of done as commitment. Let's look into how to create product backlog and sprint backlog using the Microsoft Dev Azure. This is Microsoft Dev Azure. We'll take an example of login screen as feature. So I've already created some epic feature and user stories in this. Like as an epic, which is a big chunk of work, I've creating an e-commerce application. As a feature, I've creating a login screen, and I've split this feature into some user stories. The user should be able to log in. Users should be prevented from login with incorrect credentials. Users should be logged after 6 attempts. So let's add one more user story under this feature. We'll go to new work item. We click on the product backlog item. As I'm starting everything with CEA, so I'll use this at the start of this user story. User should be able to reset the password. I'm assigning it to myself. I've added it to the first sprint. As a description, I will be writing as a user, I should be able to reset my password so that I can generate a new password. As an acceptance criteria, so I'll add two criterias in this story. The user should be able to get the reset password link in email. The user should get the temporary verification link to validate the user identity. You can give the priority, effort, business value to this user story, and you can add a feature to this user story. So now I'm able to see the new user story here. User should be able to reset the password. So now this is a product backlog. If you want to see the sprint backlog will consist of whatever the user story we have added to the sprint 1 or sprint 2 or sprint 3. So that will be sprint 1 will be having this user story because as we have added this user story to sprint 1. Let's go to sprints. So here sprint 1, sprint 2, any sprint you can select and see whatever the items are included in that sprint. So as now I'm working on sprint 1, that's my current sprint. I'll see all my 4 user stories are in my current sprint. So this is a Kanban board for this sprint. You can go to the backlog for this sprint. So you can see these user stories over here. You can move any of the user story by drag and dropping to any of the sprint. And if you go to this task board, this is a Kanban board which we use in our daily Scrum meeting. So we can move this task according to the status of the task, whether it is in to do, in progress, done, and you can add any of the column according to your need. So if you see the Scrum artifacts, so product backlog will be considered as this, in which all the user stories are there. And sprint backlog will be considered this, in which only sprint 1 user story is there. So that's a difference. That's we differentiate between the product backlog and sprint backlog. And after each and every sprint, we are expecting an increment. And this is how we create Scrum artifacts. This is how we add the requirements in the product backlog and sprint backlog. Hope this helps you in understanding these backlogs. If you feel that these videos have some nice contents, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. See you all with the continuation of this preparation.